Clayton, welcome.
Hey, how you doing, Jason?
I'm great. How are you?
Doing well, doing well.
Doing well. Good. Where are you out of today?
Right now, I'm in Salt Lake City. I'm
Nice.
doing a nomad year though, so sort of trying out a different city each month to figure out where I want to be long term.
Oh, that's fantastic. Color me jealous. I love to travel, love to bounce around. I haven't gotten to since becoming a parent, but right now my wife's and I's plan after we get the girls off to college is to buy a sailboat, spend a few years sailing around the world, and then pick a place Central South America to settle for quasi retirement. I don't know that I'll ever fully retire, but
Well, that does not sound like a bad plan at all.
I'm excited about it. I shared that as a bucket list item with my wife, and she was like, "Count me in." I was like, "Be careful saying that. I will hold you to it." But anyway, I digress. Welcome to Outbound 2.0. Excited to have you on board, Clayton. You've got a exciting career behind you. Was looking over your CV and LinkedIn profile, but give the audience a quick rundown on background, and then we'll jump into some of the product marketing, product led side of things that you work on.
Yeah, for sure. So, over 10 years of marketing experience, got my start on the growth marketing side, initially in a marketing agency, spent some time at Twitter on their sales team, was at LinkedIn, which is was at High Five, which is a video conferencing hardware software startup that's acquired by Dialpad in the growth marketing side. And that's actually where I ended up making the transition to product marketing. Found that I just find the role more engaging to sort of be working with lots of different people inside the organization is always something to sort of keep you on your toes as well. New products, messaging, positioning, all that jazz. Spent some time at LinkedIn and product marketing teams there. And then also did some sort of head of marketing roles at early stage startups, which allowed me to do a little bit of sort of both of these sides, growth marketing and product marketing. And now I'm doing some consulting and contract work.
Awesome. Like I said, that is a extremely interesting career path on that side. We've got some funky stuff going on with your camera. It's creating a very interesting effect, but I don't know if you can see that on your side.
I can't. I don't know what I would do. Let me try to go off and.
Hey, there we go.
Is that better now?
That fixed it. I have never seen anything quite like that, but glad that fixed it, repaired it. So before we get into some of the things that we had planned to talk about, tell me a little bit about the transition. You mentioned that it seemed more interesting on the product side, but what really drew you to that side of it? And what are aspects of it that you particularly enjoyed?
Yeah, I think one, I've always been sort of a tech nerd a little bit. So, and both for sort of general tech, but also at the companies that I'm at, been more interested in sort of what is the product and how do we build it? Why do we build it? Even when I was at Twitter on the sales team there, I was one of the people that was more interested in actually what is the product and how do we sort of get the most out of it? What are the latest and greatest features the team's coming out with? So I think it started with that, just sort of a general curiosity about the product and engineering side of things. And then I think the other piece was I enjoy collaborative roles. And so when you're in a growth marketing role, it tends to be more of a standalone role where you're working a lot of things on your own. It also sort of at the beginning, there's a lot of low hanging fruit. It's really exciting. We can make big improvements. And eventually it starts to get where there's not as much for us to do. And I think I get less interested when we're under the sub 10% improvements to conversion rates or click rates or whatnot. Whereas on the product marketing side, like I said, it's always something new. We're always launching a new product. We're trying to go after a new audience, or we're getting insight from sales on new messaging we need to try out. Sort of keeps me on my toes a little bit more. So I get that collaborative piece and sort of the always changing and new challenges, which is interesting to me.
Yeah, I totally get that. I mean, my first B2B SaaS company, we were a very, very high velocity, B2C type model, PLG, self-serve. I mean, almost everybody was
Yeah.
low to no touch, put their credit card down, come start a free trial, 20-second Salesforce OAuth, and you're off to the races type thing. And, we were
Mm-hmm.
doing 2,500 plus trial starts a month by the time I left. And so 90% of what we did for marketing demand gen, side of things was product marketing.
Mm-hmm.
We were the product for all intents and purposes, and it was the most tightly tied into product that I've ever been in my career. And I definitely have missed it subsequently, where I've been more distance from it. And, all the way to the last company I was at, Astronomer, where we were doing, data orchestration. It was like, I don't write Python code. I will never be eating our dog food and an end user of this
Yeah,
product.
yeah, yeah.
And so it's, it was very interesting being that divorced and that far from it, and trying to do that versus where I really started. So I totally get all of that.
Yeah, it's also, I think, for me specifically, having the mix of growth marketing and sales in my background, I think makes me a pretty good product marketer, I'd like to say, especially on the B2B side, because I understand those other roles and the teams I need to work with and collaborate with, which I think building strong relationships with obviously marketing, but also sales is super important for product marketing to be able to be successful as well. So I think that's that experience has definitely helped me and shaped how I do product marketing too.
Absolutely. So not all organizations, not all tech companies actually divvy out or separate out product marketing from, these other roles that we've mentioned.
Mm.
What's your take on that? Are there certain products, certain categories or certain go-to-market motions that make that more critical or not? Or do you think that's something that, we all really should be,
Yeah,
carving
yeah.
out as a thing?
Yeah, I think there's even if they don't break it out, there's always somebody thinking about it. And so, for instance, when I first joined at High Five, so High Five was about 75 people when I joined, and there wasn't a product marketer when I joined, but the CMO was essentially the product marketer, thinking about how are we going to position ourselves in the marketplace, what's the messaging on this website, all of those sort of things. And basically, we ended up hiring initially a sort of part-time contractor to start taking these things on, especially as we wanted to do more customer and prospect research to get insights from the market. We wanted to do more competitive, trying out the competitor products, all that sort of stuff. So I think it isn't a role that you tend to hire for, and probably your first three roles, you're going to hire somebody who is a maybe like myself that's able to do a little bit of everything. Then you're going to probably have someone on the growth marketing side, but you're going to need somebody that's thinking about these pieces, because it is really um, you can't run an advertising campaign if you don't know who your audience is, if you don't know what you're saying to them. You can't build a website without those sort of pieces in place as well. So you're doing it, whether or not you have somebody specialized in it who's really good at it. You have to do it, and in some capacity. So I think as you grow and you just have the headcount where you can have someone focus on it, I think that tends to be better. I would say, unless you have somebody that's on sort of the founding team or the C-suite that's able to do the thing, sort of thinking through of product marketing problems, you probably should, one of the first two people at least you hire should be thinking about those things, because as you sort of mentioned, it's critical to the business. Even if you're a sales-led business doing B2B, or you are like you said, free trials and everyone comes in on their own, you still need to really make sure you could have a good understanding of who your audience is, what are the problems that they have, how are we solving those with our product, helping product to figure out what they should be building long term as well to solve that. And even things like, where is our audience spending their time, so that we can make sure we're effectively spending our advertising dollars or marketing dollars in general. So it's a critical role. Whether or not you have somebody who has the title of product marketing manager, you need to have somebody who's thinking about the product marketing problems at least.
Absolutely. So you mentioned in there, target audience and, who you're going after. Of course, it's everybody knows, and it's been drilled in everybody's head, you got to nail your ICP, you got to nail
Yeah.
your target personas, all of that stuff. What's your take on that relative to product marketing? What are some of your most effective strategies,
Yeah.
tactics around that? Sort of things you really need to pay attention to. You think a lot of people might get wrong, or not hit the mark on.
Yeah, I think in a perfect world, we start with the audience before we even build really the product and the solution, because we need to know. I mean, generally, you've got a sort of solution or problem that you're trying to solve, and so you might start with a rough idea there, and then let me go talk to an audience that I think has this problem, and then you're likely going to find out the way you were thinking about it, unless you are someone who is part of that audience. Maybe you're building something for marketers or salespeople, and you've been in that space before. But if you're an engineer and you're wanting to build something for salespeople, you likely have maybe some sort of understanding just from working with them before, but you don't really know what the problem is, and how you should be solving it. And so that needs to be honestly where you start, is really trying to understand their day to day. I think. I've talked about like their challenges, their goals, their incentives, who influences them, where they get their news. All of those things are super important to make sure that you have a well-rounded idea of who these people are. And you don't need to, I mean, demographics, people sort of start to like to get like, oh, they're and in a 40 to 50-year-old so and so, like, it's really, we need to get what's the title, and especially in the B2B space. Maybe in the B2C you start to get a little bit more of those things, but I always think it's funny when we're in B2B and we're trying to get some of these other sort of characteristics or demographic info in there, when really at the end of the day it's more about the business side of them that we need to really understand it. And we could go a little bit deeper to understand those other pieces. There's not no value to them, but generally as a startup, it's not worth our time to try to start thinking about those things as much as the pieces that really dictate what solutions they're buying. I think that's the other piece too, that it's competitor, but it also goes into audiences. How are they solving these problems today? And sometimes that might be another software solution or whatnot, or maybe it's they're using a spreadsheet or email or something to do that as well. So I think that piece is really important, because then we can start to test our messaging, because we know who we're supposed to be going after. Now let's go figure out what's the right message to get that audience. So the way that I like to even test the audience as well. So generally, like I said, the best thing is to go and talk to real people and get some insight from them. So hopefully you've got some people in your network you can start with. You can also do outbound sort of messaging campaigns through LinkedIn to people that fit sort of the persona. And there's going to be some people that are really cool to give sort of the startup some insight. You might need to bribe others with gift cards or free meals or free drinks or whatever. But try to get them on the phone or on the video or meet in person to sort of ask them these questions. And once you've got a handful, I think at least maybe 10 to 20 would be nice. Now we can start to do some testing at scale, maybe with LinkedIn ads or Facebook or whatever, depending on, again, on your audience, to double down on, is this the right? I think I've got a couple audiences I think are going to be a good fit. So for instance, in the two roles that I was head of marketing at early stage startups, they were both sales tech. And so it was, okay, do we want to, is it VPs of sales / heads of sales? Is it director or head of RevOps or sales ops? I know that it's sales leadership. And so how do I start to double down into those to figure out what are the specific personas that are going to perform better? And then also on top of that, what's the messaging that's going to resonate? Because it is a different message that's going to resonate for a director of RevOps versus a VP of sales. They're trying to solve similar problems, but a little bit differently. And so trying to figure that out, that's the next step after we start to understand generally who our audience is.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's obviously always should be a qualitative and a quantitative side to things, but similar to you, anytime I'm advising, a early stage company is still trying to find product market fit, or looking at rolling out new feature, new product, new target persona, anything like that, I always tell them, start with the stuff that doesn't scale.
Yeah, yeah.
And in particular, having one-on-one conversations with actual human beings. Where you're going to get the deepest insights. It's also a reason why I'm a pretty strong believer. The companies that create the best products are typically eating their own dog food and
Yeah.
the power users of their own product platform. Because if you build for yourself as a user of it, like you're going to get a level of depth of understanding of needs and what's working, what's not, that is really hard to replicate otherwise.
Yeah.
on the
The one
on
thing
the
I would,
quant- Good.
so I was just saying, the one thing I would say about that though is, like in both of the, really all the startup experience I've had, but especially the last two, we were startups, early stage startups, and we were building for people that were at least, we were seed stage. We were building for people that were at least Series B. And so the problems and how they think about things, it's like saying, the way we use it is the way our customers are going to use it. It's not correct. And so I think there's a little bit of, like, we need to make sure that the product works and it solves the general problems. But I think, I think that is really important, like you said, but it can't be, we can't just make an assumption like, oh, it works for us as a 20-person company, it's going to work for the 2,000-person company just as well. Because it's just completely different processes and headaches and stuff that they have that we're just not going to have. And so you definitely need a combination of both of those. And so the other thing I would say, we're talking about, generally I was talking about sort of at the beginning of the company and or at the beginning of trying to understand our audience. But this is something we always have to keep doing, because your audience is likely also going to change. You're probably going to start with more earlier stage companies that are less risk adverse, and that's going to be a very different customer than maybe even a year later or 2 years later, when now we're able to start moving up the up market because we've got a more robust product, because we started to build our name a little bit in the industry. And so the 50-person company we were selling to for the first handful of customers is different from the 500-person, and is definitely different from the 2,000-person. So we need to keep going back to the well. And the good thing is now we have hopefully customers that we can go back to, and they're more likely to give us feedback and be that that qualitative data that we need. And it's a little bit easier than when we first started and we didn't have any customers and everything. We had to sort of find people that would give us the time of day. They're more likely to respond to the email and do the phone calls. But it is definitely something we got to keep doing over and over again. Eventually you get to the size where your audience isn't changing too much, and maybe you don't have to do it as often, but still, I don't really think there's a day when you ever stop doing market research, even to your own current customers.
No, absolutely not. Because I mean, as you mentioned, the ground is constantly shifting. It's it's the ground relative to your company perception in the market, the product as it's evolving, the needs of your customers as they're evolving, what competition's doing, macroeconomic issues. I mean, like, you name it, it's always shifting. And if you're not paying attention to it and constantly adjusting and optimizing, then it's not going to take long before you're behind the eight ball and in a difficult position. And 100% agree with you that, like, you can't always be the ones eating the dog food and being able to say whether this is a fit or not. And you definitely don't want to try and force that if it's not a fit. But if it is and you can do it, absolutely make sure you do it. Like, I've consulted with, advised, whatever, many companies where, like, that was absolutely something they could and should be using internally, and they don't. Like, alarm bells go off when you see that. It's like, really, you're not even using your own product here, when you absolutely could or should be doing it. That's a giant red flag whenever you do that. So on the quantitative side, you mentioned some strategies as far as, like, being able to test some messaging, doing some things to sort of at more scale. I've used used AdWords campaigns and paid campaigns and stuff like that to test some things out and stuff like that. Anything additional or innovative that you found that works, anything relative to, like, the product itself. I've always been fascinated by and enjoyed, when I've had an opportunity to dive into, like, hey, what are our users actually doing within the product? And what can we gain as far as insights out of that, especially if you can marry that with, like, actual demographic, firmographic information around the company, things like that.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things that is great if you can do it, and generally it's not your your seed or Series A company that has the resources to do it, but if you can look at how customers are using your product and try to get like data science basically to say, okay, what are the features that are most likely to drive sort of stickiness and decrease churn rates and those sort of things. And it's a longer tail project. Usually you have to have more than 10 customers in order to get enough data to really be able to do it. And so you need scale to do it, but depending on the type of business you have and obviously where you are in the age of the company as well, that's absolutely something we should be looking at. And in that way, we've got the features that are most valuable to our most valuable customers. And so now that helps us to figure out, again, to refine the audience, but also refine the messaging, and helps us even maybe to pivot. Okay, we're not a company that does X because we're building features for all that and people don't care about it as much. We're a company that does Y now because that's the features that they have really latched onto. So I think if as much as possible, being able to, like you said, look at usage data and not just in the raw numbers, but what are the insights that it tells us on how we should be building our products going forward, how we should be marketing ourselves. I think that's super helpful. Another one is, again, once you have the large enough customer base, start running surveys to your customers to get an idea of who they are and what other solutions they're looking at, what other sort of problems that they have. I think one of the things you mentioned is as the sort of the macro environment changes, it would have been a great idea about a year ago or maybe a little less. We're not quite at the downturn, I think, of the market yet. But when things are starting to figure out, instead of guessing what your customers are thinking, start to figure out what are the problems that they're now facing and how has that changed from what they were doing the quarter before? Are they likely trying to figure out how they can cut costs or drive more revenue, or they're likely probably thinking in the sales space, for instance, how can I increase my net retention rate a lot more than I was thinking about that in the past? And what are the things that we can do in the changing of the messaging and positioning or even the product to solve the problems that they have today? And so you're not going to be able to, once you have 150 plus 100 plus customers, be able to talk to everybody, but we can start to send out surveys. And again, if we can incentivize with a gift card or whatnot, we'll get a relatively high response rate to that. I think the other reason that those are helpful is sometimes, depending on, again, on your business, you might have a buyer audience, which is obviously your most important audience, but then you might also have a large user audience that we also need to understand how maybe who they are and what their day-to-day is. And so being able to do surveys to them, because you're likely your sales team's not talking to them, your customer success team isn't talking to them because they're not the buyers, but they are a super important audience for us to really understand as we're building the product, as we're building education in the product. So I think those sort of things, looking at product usage data and gleaning as many insights as we can from that. And then also, can we use surveys to get other sort of data pieces on the quant side can be helpful. And it ends up being a sort of never-ending cycle. Now we have this data. Let's go and talk to people about that data to sort of add color to the quantitative data with some qualitative pieces as well.
Yeah, you always go back and forth. Like you use the qualitative to give you insights, both as far as what you saw in the data, but also to give you insights into what to go look for in the data. Because I mean, one of the hardest parts when it comes to analytics oftentimes is surfacing the interesting things to go take a deeper look at. Because oftentimes you have so much noise in there that if you don't have an indication of where to go and what to start looking for and paying attention to, it becomes a needle in a haystack. And so that's where the qualitative side can give you insights into like, oh, hey, this might be something that's going on, or this is something that, we should go look at, see if the data supports that. And then, backwards to the other side of it. Hey, we found something interesting in the data. Is this explainable or supportable based off of the the qualitative conversations that we can have? One thing on the product usage side of things, this was surprising to me, but after looking at it, it sort of made sense. But interested to hear your take and whether this has been your experience. But that in general, new features should be created and rolled out for net new users, because driving adoption of net new features in your existing user base is generally a really heavy lift, which, at least in my experience, has made trying to determine kind of what's sticky, what's not, without adding a layer of sophistication around like cohorts, around when people joined, or when people started becoming a user, difficult to do relative to that noisiness that's created whenever, based off of when new features were rolled out, and how much exposure they had to it prior to. Has your experience been similar around that, or have you had different?
I think so. Most of my experience has been more on the B2B side. So I think, and I think that's probably true more for B2C, where you don't have the, correct me if I'm wrong on sort of what you're thinking as well, where you don't have the boots on the ground that can give you the insight into why. Because what I think about when I think of like for current customers is when we're at High Five, for instance, in the video conferencing space, they might buy when they're a smaller stage startup, and then they might start thinking about churning because we didn't have the things that allowed them to do sort of all hands meetings once they got to 1,000 employees or whatnot. And so there are definitely features that keep people from churning. There's also things that we did that would be upsells for them. Okay, now we don't just do video conferencing. Now we also do audio conferencing. And so I think it's definitely a balance of both. I think you need to think about, obviously, a lot of these features also helped new customers come in. So we weren't building things that would only be, hey, we got to make sure we keep the current base that we have. We got to be doing both, but there were absolutely most of the features that we were building would help to keep them from thinking about, hey, I'm going to go somewhere else, because it's such a competitive space in the video conferencing area that, and I think the funny piece is that people, I don't know what it's like today. I'm assuming it's similar for any new players that are trying to come to the market, but they don't like WebEx, they don't like GoToMeeting or what have you, and maybe they don't even like Zoom, but they want the new thing to act just like the old thing. They want to have the same feature set, and they're not going to go find this new product that doesn't have the 1,000 features that WebEx has been building for the last 20 years or so. And so that was the other thing that we had, is we had to build differentiated features, but we also had a long list of table stakes things that, especially as our customers got larger, they wanted more and more of those table stakes features. And so I think it depends on the market and whatnot on sort of, I think, if that's the case. Now, if you're already basically you built a product that fully solves your current customer needs, and they're not sort of, there's no competitor out there that's got 5 more features than you that they're thinking of switching to because it's got those features. I think that's right. You should be thinking more about, okay, we've pretty much solved the problems of the customers we have today. Now let's go and try to solve the problems of the next customers, and not think about how do we drive deeper adoption. If we're getting enough adoption from our current customers that they're going to keep around, then we don't need to be thinking about making it more and more and more sticky. We need to be thinking about the next people.
Yeah, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that you shouldn't try and make things that are more sticky, or try and make things that are going to address things that competition's doing, or giving people a reason to jump. I was just talking about my experience, and in talking to other product leads or product marketers. It seems to be a fairly common experience. Trying to drive adoption of net new features into existing established user base is usually an enormous lift and challenge. And so you'll see adoption of those new features lag way behind adoption of those features relative to net new people coming into the product. Because what you'll oftentimes see is the people that are in there and already used to using it and stuff like that, they've got their established workflows. They've got their established things that they're doing and things that you're used to. And so Oftentimes they're not aware of the net new features that are rolling out. If they are, they haven't had time or bandwidth or motivation to
Yeah.
go dive into them and stuff like that. And so, just alluding to some of the complexity in that quantitative side of things of like different cohorts relative to when these things are rolled out are going to behave very differently relative
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
those. And so if you're just looking at across your entire population of active users within it, that data is going to get a little wonky in there on you.
Yeah, I think that as you're thinking about that, I think that's true again as the company gets larger and older and your customer base gets larger and older. I think I felt more of that at, say, LinkedIn, for instance, where we had a very complex product and we tried to add something new in, and there's already so many things that people are doing on the platform. And it's also difficult because there are so many different types of people that use the platform that we can't market every new feature to all the hundreds of millions of users because it's not going to be relevant to all hundreds of millions. It might be relevant to 2 million, which is still a really large audience. But how do we find those right people in sort of the haystack that is all of the LinkedIn users? Whereas my experience sort of at earlier stage companies, you don't have the customer base isn't large enough for you to have a problem reaching everybody. And they're sort of homogeneous enough that you can also build products that are going to be valuable for all of them. You've got a connection with everybody across the sales and customer success team. But yes, as you get bigger, it's going to be harder and harder to do that because, like you said, they've been using your product for 5 years, and then you try to add in this new thing, and it's changing this habit that they have. I think if you look at a product like Salesforce as well, I'm sure they add in new features all the time that I have no idea that have been added. Or maybe I'm giving them more credit than they deserve. Maybe they don't add features, but I know that it takes forever, for instance, for them to switch everybody over to Lightning because it's been so entrenched into the way they were doing business. You've got these really large enterprises that don't like change, and so they don't want to sort of make the change over, and that does give you a better experience, but it's really difficult to sort of get new people to do that. Whereas every new customer they've gotten since they've introduced Lightning obviously are already on the platform. And so, yeah, I think it kind of depends on where you are in the company life stage, but it absolutely gets older as you get bigger, harder as you get bigger, and your customer base has been using you for longer and longer.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. So one of the things I love about product marketing is that it really touches on every stage of the user journey. And so as opposed to, the more traditional marketing, demand gen, growth type, roles within it, which are, focused primarily on getting people in the door, getting them, educated, getting them qualified, getting them ready to have a sales conversation, and even across the finish line to an actual paid customer. But for the most part, that's where it sort of ends and where the focus is at. Relative to product marketing, of course, like you've got a role to play on that side of it, but you've also got every bit of, in a lot of cases, even bigger role to play after they become a customer. And some of the stuff that we were talking about around new features and adoption and all of that stuff obviously plays a role in that. What's your take on how do you balance those competing interests and priorities within that, especially given that oftentimes, in my experience, product marketing is the smaller of the departments, and as far as manpower and stuff like that. And so, whenever you're looking at having to serve multiple different functions within that user journey and points within that with a smaller team and even smaller budget in a lot of cases, how do you balance all that?
Yeah, so I think the first piece, how do you figure out where to focus your time? I think that depends a lot on what's important for the company. So for some companies, they don't have a churn problem maybe, or they're so early that they really just need to be driving net new customers, and that needs to be everybody's focus because that's where you're going to get the most growth. Maybe with other companies, they excuse me, they have a problem. Okay, we land the customers, but then we can't get them to use the product as well as they should. And so we maybe that ends up resulting in churn, or maybe the way we drive, we charge is based on usage, all those sort of things. So we need to be, we don't need help focusing on the net new customer. We need help focusing on driving adoption and onboarding of these customers. Maybe it's, again, it's we've got a good customer base, and now we want to sort of upsell them. So the way we do business is we land and expand, and we need help with the expand piece. How do we get them to, obviously onboarding is one piece, but now how do we get them to understand the value of this next sort of add-on feature, and help to sell that and market that. So I think it depends a lot on where the problems are, where the opportunities are in the business. And I think to your point, product marketing needs to do a lot of prioritization. Even within, if we were to say we're going to focus on onboarding, there's a million things we could obviously be doing there. And so we need to start focusing on how do we prioritize those pieces, whether it's product or email campaigns or in-product campaigns. Where are we spending our time to drive the most adoption? And I think the other piece is we need to lean into our partner teams. So product marketing is likely not running the ad campaigns themselves. They're likely not running the email campaigns themselves. Again, depends on the company. They could be doing those things. So the team tends to be a more strategic team that works with others on marketing, sales, et cetera, to actually run these campaigns. And so that's why I always talk about one of the biggest skills that you need as a product marketer is the ability to influence and collaborate with other team members, because you're not going to be able to do your job without others getting involved. An ad or email marketer can likely do most of their job, maybe not as well, but they can do most of their job without involving other people in the process. But product marketing can't do that. So that's being able to sort of get other people on board, I think, is important, and it's helpful. Again, if it's the company directive, this is the focus that we have. That's going to be a lot easier to get those other partner teams to work with you, because that's coming from the top down.
No, I agree completely. I mean, there's a strong argument to be made that there's not much on the go-to-market side of the equation that's as cross-functional as product marketing. You've got to involve sales. You got to be involved in the other marketing demand gen motions. You got to be involved in, success and support. You obviously have to be tied into product. That's a lot of cats to herd. And then especially if you add in the additional layer of complexity of all of the multi-channels that you've got to try and manage in doing this, because just hitting users in one channel is not going to do it. You've got to meet them where they are, and so typically that's going to mean having updates to the website, having email campaigns, running ads, and you also mentioned, and this is the big one, in product, because when you talk about meeting people where they are, like in the product is obviously the most effective place to be able to meet them. But that presents its own challenges and complexities within that, based off of, how is the product architected, and what do you use to plug into that, and what's your real estate to be able to do messaging around that? Can you do like a in-app tour or guide or that stuff? And so it becomes very, very complex to be able to do this and do this well.
Yeah, I think there are tools out there that help with that. Like Intercom, for instance, has the in-product banners or chat and whatnot. There's obviously the old-fashioned way of working with engineering to build these things. I think engineering doesn't really want to build them, and so if we can figure out a way that there's a tool that we can build in that makes it easier. I have found for sure in different roles where we build the feature and maybe product marketing wasn't as involved. And so we build everything and not thinking about the go-to-market. And it's like, oh, I need a tooltip in here, or, oh, I need the deep link if I'm going to run an email campaign driving to this part of the app. And it's a mobile app. I need to be able to sort of deep link them to that piece of the application. And those are the things that they're not thinking of. And engineers do not want to go back and into what they've already shipped and like build more because they want to move on to the next thing. And so I think that's means it's important that product marketing makes sure that we're involved early in the product development process, so that these things are sort of spec'd in when the PM puts together their product spec, and so that we're building the pieces needed to make sure that it's successful. Because if we just build it like you're talking about earlier, especially I think at any phase, if we just build it and we put it in there to assume that people are going to notice it and use it is not very high. Maybe if we've got a very simple product, they'd be like, oh, what's that new button or that new tab in the product that I haven't noticed before? But likely we'll need to do something to sort of highlight it. We need to run email campaigns, potentially add campaigns to current customers or prospects, and be able to drive them, especially if we have a product-led growth sort of function, be able to drive them to a specific part of the product, all those sort of things. And so, I think that's one that people don't think about, especially in the non-product marketing sphere. They don't think about the end product piece, but it's super helpful for onboarding, driving adoption, upsells, all that good stuff.
Yeah, if you're somebody that has confidence in people's ability to figure things out, spend more time with some heat maps and user recordings. And it's like, why are you clicking down here? Like, there's a giant blinking red button up here. Like, what are you doing?
Yeah, people will always they'll always misread things and not notice stuff, and you can they're gonna skim it. And so to think that, well, we told them what it does and where to and how to do it and everything, well, they didn't read it. So we'll need to tell them again, or we need to think about the way that we did it, or can we put videos or illustrations or something as part of this as well, so that they really understand what the product is doing, and they learn it, and then now they want to use it because they know what the value is, hopefully.
Absolutely. So, I mean, a lot of what we've talked about here is, all of the needs and how valuable it is to drive that alignment, drive that coordination, all of that stuff. That's, of course, easier said than done. How have you managed to do that? At different organizations you've done this with? Because, I mean, I'm here to tell you from my experience, like, it's really damn hard.
Yeah, I think honestly, one of the biggest things is to take a skill that product marketers already have, understanding your audience, and using that internally as well. So understanding the product management, what are their goals, their challenges? Usually they're wanting to ship products. Usually they're wanting people to use these products. And so how do we use that, understanding that, and say, hey, if we want this to get out, we want it to be successful, we need to do these things to make sure that happens. That usually helps in those conversations, because you're coming from a place of understanding them. Same with the sales team, understanding at the end of the day, generally especially the individual contributors, what they're thinking about is their quota. And so if what you want to talk about does not somehow correlate to how they're going to be able to have higher quota attainment or drive more personal income, they're really not going to care. And so you need to make sure that you make that connection for them. It's the leadership generally is a little bit more understanding of how this maybe fits into the better, the overall company goals and whatnot. But even for them, they're still, their job is whether or not they're going to have it next quarter or next year is predicated on, can their team hit their quota? And so can we think about, again, when you're coming and you're positioning your messaging and wanting to train the team, how does this actually help for the goals that the personal goals that they have? And that's going to differ depending on who within the company that you're actually talking to. The message for the sales team is absolutely going to be a different message than it is for the product team, than it is for the marketing team. And so the same skill set that we use to market to prospects and to customers, we need to use that to market or sort of internally sell and influence our partner teams and help to get them on board. I think the other thing that's super helpful, I already mentioned it, really, is if we can get leadership to also give a sort of top-down directive on some things that we're working on as well. And honestly, if we're working on something generally, and no matter what team you're on, if you're working on something that doesn't align to company goals, you probably shouldn't be working on that thing anyways. And so trying to understand what are the company goals, how does what I do align to that is also super important.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's, I mean, my experience, it's been critical in trying to get people to march to the tune of the same drum. I mean, if you've got things that are kind of, hey, we need to work with this department or this,
Yeah.
this person, or maybe even like two of them, going and speaking their language and all of that stuff and making it, digestible within their interest and priorities, absolutely can do a lot. But like we talked about, oftentimes, especially on the product marketing side, it's bringing multiple different, 5, 6, as many as roles, priorities, stuff like that together. And as you add that, you add complexity. And so, in order to deal with that, in my experience, it's mostly taken, trying to distill that down to what are the common priorities that we have. And, ideally, even as if you can get it down to like a single North Star metric, everybody's trying to optimize against and move towards. And that has been the biggest game changer for me in trying to drive that unified action and getting everybody on the same page and moving in the same direction.
Yeah, I think the other thing that's important is how do I, as a product marketer, how do I show quick wins to build the trust with the team as well? And at the end of the day, people are more likely to work with you and help you out if they also trust that you're there to do the same for them. And so, what can I do, especially when joining a new organization or working with a new leader? What can I do to show quick wins and to build that trust? As goes a long way to building the relationship too.
No. Have you had much? So, and back to the North Star metric thing. That sounds great, and that's and it's pretty easy to understand why that would be useful, where everybody's trying to optimize for the same thing. It's also in my career been one of the hardest things for me to nail down at most organizations. Like, what is a metric that across all of the roles, sales, marketing, product, success, support, everybody can optimize against? And oftentimes that's really hard to get to. Do you have any strategies for how you can try and get to, if not a single, a handful of metrics that are shared across as much of the organization as possible?
Yeah, I mean, if the leadership doesn't have like, hey, this is our revenue goal that we're going towards, or our usage goal, or our churn goal, or at least something like that, probably isn't going to be a super successful organization, to be frank. And so I think sometimes it might be that they have these goals and they're just not well shared with the rest of the team. They maybe share, here's the revenue goal with the sales team, maybe with the marketing team, or here's the usage goal they share with the product team. And so I think it's more about how do we make sure that those are shared across the organization. And then, like you said, that everyone's marching the same way. So for a revenue goal, sometimes teams feel like, well, that's the sales goal. That's not, maybe it's marketing's goal a little bit, but that's really the sales goal. But no, at the end of the day, we need to make sure we're also building products that help us to drive more revenue too. If we think that we are losing deals because we don't have X feature, then how do we go and build that feature so that we're winning more of those deals? Or are we, the product experience is confusing for users, and so new users aren't onboarding very well, and so we need to be changing that. So it isn't, I think that's maybe the misnomer that we sometimes have, is that some of these goals are only for certain teams, but we need to figure out as a collective company, how does each team, and then hopefully each individual, what am I working on that's going to help to drive this goal? Usually the company has some sort of revenue goal in order to be able to be successful. And so how do we make sure that is distributed to the whole organization, and then start to build? I think the first step in this process as well is we have to build the company goals first, and then what are the sort of individual team goals that ladder up to those, and then what are the individual individual goals that ladder up to those team goals. And so that way we can make sure that everybody's OKRs or goals are connected, and all the way up to hopefully the revenue one. There might not be something where you as an individual, you can sort of see the clear, okay, this is going to drive X amount of revenue, but at least as the team, okay, we're going to try to do these things that we think will drive maybe X amount of revenue, and you're working on a specific project that we think is going to help us to reach that goal or whatnot. So I think that's the piece. Like I said, if the company doesn't have some sort of at least revenue goal, it's not going to be very successful. And so I'd say maybe pressure the CEO and the C-suite to at least build something like that if they somehow aren't doing that already.
Yeah, and I mean, I think the vast majority of companies, and like you said, the ones that don't or probably got deeper problems that they need to solve for, have at least revenue goals. But the problem with revenue as a North Star metric is it's primarily a backwards facing metric. So it's not forward looking where you've got an ability to really accurately or reliably project what's going to happen. And instead, it's okay, we missed revenue target. Why did we miss revenue target? How did we miss revenue target? Now we got to go look at what happened and try and reverse engineer what's going on. Ideally, you want something that's a forward-facing metric that's going to give you the ability to project what's going to be happening, and that's what you're optimizing towards. And that's going to be where you've got an actual, really effective North Star metric. But of course, that makes it that much harder to go find what that metric or what those handful of metrics are going to be, because it's like, well, hell, like the revenue was the only thing we could agree on. And even then, like, it took how many meetings and, us bashing our heads against the wall to even get to some sort of quasi consensus on that. How do you get to something else? And, I mean, at Rev Genius, what we've settled on is, it's very much a, PLG, type, play relative to community. But, our North Star metric is weekly active community members within within the Slack community. And so from there, we're able to pretty reliably project like what's engagement with partner events going to look like, what's word of mouth of getting new partners to come in, what's our ability to be able to sell those, how well are we doing at balancing the interest of the community relative to the partners and sponsors that we have, and stuff like that. But and then from there, like, you got to get into the tooling. Like, how do you actually measure that? How do you, give that as a metric and something that the different roles and departments can actually look at and gauge? Like, okay, we changed up the frequency of events. What did that do to weekly active, community members? Hey, we changed up the format. Hey, we brought in these new partners, stuff like that. So, it gets complicated and it gets sophisticated to do it and do it well.
Yeah, I think one of the other tips I would share is, as much as possible, to think further out with the goals too. So if all we have is, okay, at the end of each quarter, we're going to build our revenue goal for the next quarter, then you don't have enough time. Product engineering doesn't have enough time likely to do anything that's going to impact that. But if you say, okay, to get the profitability, to get the next round of funding, to IPO, we need to, in 2 years, 3 years, we need to be at this revenue number. Okay, now we can start to back into what do we think. I think, like you said, like what's keeping us from being able to drive that in the most recent quarters or most recent years, and what do we think we need to do across all these teams to be able to hit those goals. If we're going to drive just, let's say, $1 million in revenue, how many, do we need to increase the value per customer, the number of customers? Do we need, like, for instance, on the marketing side, is that more? How many leads would we have to do? Okay, what's the click rate look like today? What's the cost per click look like today on the ad campaign, to be able to back into that number? But likely it's not just, okay, we spend more. It's also, we got to optimize these campaigns along the way as well. But yeah, I think you have to look further down the line. Then you can't just look like this quarter and next quarter, because the ability to impact those, like you said, that started this quarter. Ability to impact this quarter started last quarter. Even with sales pipeline, we can't come into the quarter and say, okay, we got no leads right now, no active conversations happening, and now we've got to go hit this goal. I mean, that goal better be pretty small, because it's going to be difficult for most B2B businesses to hit a quarterly goal if they start with a completely clean slate at the beginning of the quarter, because now we're going to obviously have time to build these leads in, to start the conversations. It's probably not until the second half of the first month, or at least at the very least, and maybe the second month of the quarter, that we're actually starting to have those conversations. So yeah, I think that's valid. That this quarter's goal, you have got to start in that last quarter, and so you got to think longer term with your goals in order to be able to really plan for them in an effective way, especially if you want it to be more than just, okay, well, we're going to amp up the marketing budget. If we want to do things in the product or hiring or any of these other sort of things, those take longer than a couple of weeks to do, and so we need to start planning a few quarters out what we're going to do in order to be able to be ready for that one.
Yep, 100%. So we're coming up at the end of the time. One last question for you. Obviously, things are shifting pretty rapidly and dramatically in in the market, in the macro right now, especially in the tech space. You're seeing a lot more focus on things like NRR versus sort of growth at any cost. What are you seeing right now, especially relative to product marketing, that's really, really vital to adjusting to and adapting to the current situation?
Yeah, I think in some aspects, product marketing is becoming more important because we can't just spend our way to our marketing goals as much. And so we need to be more focused with, say, advertising campaigns or just the number of projects that we're running. And so sort of bring it maybe full circle back to the audience. We need to make sure that we're targeting the exact right people, so we're not wasting our time, wasting our money with people that just aren't going to convert and they're not going to be the right audience for us. Even to some extent, we don't want to be sending leads to the sales team that aren't going to be good leads, even if they make it to the phone call. If they're not going to end up being the ones that are likely to convert, then we need to just try to cut them out as much as we can. I mean, you don't want to do too much, but at least do some fine tuning there that we're more efficient on the sales side, because you're not able to do as much hiring as you may have before. We can't, again, not only can we spend our way out of it on the marketing side, we can't just hire our way out of it on the sales side and say, okay, we're going to have leads where like 50% of them are ones we should actually probably be talking to. We need to be optimizing the number of leads that make it to the sales team that actually become opportunities, and of those opportunities that end up closing. And so I think overall, it's how can we optimize the full go-to-market motion, and a lot of that comes back to, are we targeting the right people with the right message and the right product to make sure that we are going to be efficient. And so I think it puts more emphasis on product marketing than we may have had before, where I know a lot of startups, for instance, they hire a lot of people on the growth marketing side to sort of to run email and ads and SEO and all these sort of things without thinking as much deeply about who they're targeting and what the messaging is. And I think that's always been wrong. But I think today you can't really do that, because it's going to be, it's just too inefficient to just sort of throw everything at the wall and see what sticks. You've got to have a little bit more of a targeted approach in order to be efficient with the money that you have now.
Amen. Amen. Well, we're at the end of our time. Clayton, tell the audience, where can they find you?
Yeah, sure. So LinkedIn's the best. So linkedin.com/in/Clayton Pritchard. I also have my own personal website, not too much on there other than resumes, some blogs and stuff, but that's claytonpritchard.com. So you can reach out there. And then if you are a foodie like me, I also have a foodie Instagram page at the Boba Nerd. So feel free to follow that as well if you like food pics and reviews and whatnot.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining us today, Clayton. This has been a great conversation, and we'll definitely get back together.